There are only four Category 5 hurricanes that have hit the U.S. 1935 Labor Day hurricane, Camille in 69, Andrew in 92, and Michael in 2018. And one of us was in Hurricane Michael, and it wasn't me. It was you. You were in Hurricane Michael in Panama City. So, where exactly were you for Panama City, and were you thinking this is going to be the big one?
Yeah. So where I rode the storm out, I rode it out in my childhood home with my mom. My grandma went to the local church, the big, well built church, to ride it out with my uncle, her son, and a couple other people that didn't want to evacuate but didn't feel quite safe in their home. And so my mom and I rode it out in my grandma's house, just trying to keep an eye on everything, mitigate any damages that may have popped up. But what really set in that, okay, this is the big one, was probably early in the morning on October 10th, whenever, still about 6 hours from landfall, when hurricane hunters were flying in it. And each report and each pass through the center showed a millibar drop and a wind speed increase. And it was constant. It was like almost every report, winds were going up by 5, 5, 5, 5. And I tried to find the video because the anniversary had just passed. But I did a live video on my Facebook page, and it's about 2 minutes long. And this is back when I smoked cigarettes. I stopped now, obviously, but I was stressed out. I had a cigarette in my hand, and I recorded a video talking to all my friends and family on Facebook, saying, "Guys, I think this is it. Our time of dodging bullets has come and passed, and you guys need to be ready. It's too late to leave. Get to a center part of your house and stay there until tomorrow," basically. And I left my apartment, drove across town, picked up my grandmother, and then took her to the church. But before I dropped her off, we did one loop around the block. And I said, "Take a good look, because here in about 6 hours, it's not going to look like this anymore." And part of me didn't believe it. Part of me thought that, maybe it's not going to be that bad. Maybe we'll get lucky. But then, sure enough, 6 hours later, total destruction, total devastation. Didn't recognize anything.
Did you? I mean, did you even consider leaving, or were you basically obligated to stay for your family?
Combination of both. So I established at a young age that whenever I do get my own home and I'm responsible for my own life, I'm not evacuating. I'm not leaving. I'm gonna ride out. I'm gonna ride out anything. One, I'm a storm chaser, so I put myself in these positions all across the country anyway. So I'm sure as heck not gonna leave the comfort of my own home, right? And then number two, what I did for my employment, I was obligated to stay. I worked for the Bay County Sheriff's Office, so when I started working there, I basically had to sign a contract that says,
I'm
I'm
not.
a, yep, I'm a first responder. I'm not evacuating. I have to stay. And so that wasn't a major determining factor, but there was also that caveat that I am obligated to stay. But
So
no.
so wait, you were a cop?
So I was a correctional officer.
Oh,
Yeah, so I worked for the Bay County Jail when Hurricane Michael hit, and I also worked for the Florida Department of Corrections, the state prison, um, a couple years before that, and for a couple of years after that. But I worked for the Bay County Jail for a little bit in between,
I'm
and
guess I'm guessing the Bay County Jail evacuated.
nope, we were there. The jail was there. Um, the jail was there for the entire time, and I remember I went so the hurricane hit Wednesday, and my scheduled days off were Wednesday, Thursday, and it was weird how we did the schedule. One week you would work Monday, Tuesday, you would be off on Wednesday and Thursday, and then you would work Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then the next week it flipped. But that particular week, I was scheduled to work that weekend, but I had Wednesday, Thursday off. So I worked the overnight shift Tuesday morning, I got off work at 6 a.m. and then I went home. That's when I did everything I just talked about on the forecast, making the video, or on the podcast, making the video, things like that. But I didn't go back into work until Friday. Well, we had no cell phone service, nothing. So Verizon was down. I think AT&T was down. I think only Sprint and T-Mobile were the only two towers that were up and running at the time. So Verizon and AT&T were just down. But I went into work on Friday, and I showed up, and my lieutenant was there, and he never left. So he had been at the jail since the hurricane hit up until I got there on Friday. And he basically came up and gave me a big hug and said, "Thank you so much for showing up. You can go whatever dorm you want to go. Just please help these people out." There had been officers that had been working for 36 hours straight without a break. But then the inmate side of it, the inmates had absolutely no idea how bad it was outside. And so they thought that we were deliberately withholding showers, we were deliberately withholding air condition, deliberately withholding television. They had no idea. And so they rioted, or they tried to riot. And they actually attacked a couple of the officers on my shift. And so me and my other officer who was in the dorm with me, we ran to the call and we got in there. And man, like I said, it was nothing short of a riot. They were trying to break down the door, trying to get out, because again, they thought that we were purposely putting them in this situation. And eventually, the lieutenant had to get in there and be like, "Look, I can't show you guys how bad it is out there, but I need you to take my word for it. It is an apocalyptic wasteland out there," and it
Was
was.
was there any damage to the jail done by said hurricane?
Yeah, a couple of the AC units were blown off the roof. Those big 2-ton, 4-ton units that are up there, just
Yeah,
completely blown off the roof. In the from the storm.
interesting that interesting because you hear in storms now that the jails always evacuate, but that didn't happen in Bay County. Hmm.
And a lot of it had to do with leadership. I think there's two causes for that. Excuse me. There's the first cause, which is we've always been lucky. We've always dodged the bullet.
Rather be good
And
than lucky, right?
yeah, we've always dodged a bullet. So there's no need for us to evacuate because it's just going to end up missing us. That was part of it. And then the other part of it was by the time they realized how serious it was too late. And so they had no choice but to stay because it was too late. And that was the same thing with the state prisons as well. Gulf Correctional Institution is located in Weehawken, Florida, which is in Gulf County. And the prison itself actually went right through the center of Hurricane Michael. And all of those inmates did not get evacuated. So they all rode it out in this prison. Now, of course, prisons are made out of solid concrete and rebar, so there was no danger of collapse. But the roofing systems and the amenities, those were all destroyed. And so they ended up, after the hurricane, having to move all those inmates out and ship them to different places across the state because the compound was closed. It was too damaged. But you know, uh, prisoners, for the most part, inmates, they're there for a reason. And, obviously, if they're there, it's probably because they deserve to be there. But the human empathy of it still doesn't go away. You know, try to put myself in their shoes. How would I react if I was essentially held against my will in this place, behind rebar, with no contact with the outside world, and it sounds like the apocalypse is happening right outside my window?
Sounds like a tornado happened. So
Yeah,
obviously the crooks didn't know a Cat 5 hurricane was hitting there.
right. Yeah, no, they had no idea. And again, because Tuesday morning, whenever Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning before landfall, we were talking Cat 4. That's when we were thinking, okay, Category 4, but a lot of people were still holding out hope that maybe at the last second it was going to shift off to the left or shift off to the right, and it never did, and it just kept growing. And now, like I remember right after Hurricane Michael, it took a couple of weeks because it was real pretty weather after the hurricane hit. But a couple of weeks later, we started to get into fall, where you get these cold fronts that come through and the severe weather associated with it. Um, People were just having a complete meltdown, like a total nervous breakdown on Facebook and social media because of this line of severe storms. One, because they just went through a traumatic hurricane, and two, a lot of their shelters and a lot of their places that they stay in were damaged and destroyed, and they didn't have anywhere to go. So the mental aspect of it is something that is still around today. And I tell you, I've been through 24 tropical cyclones that I've chased, and that's not including the ones from 2004, 2005 when I was a kid. Those are just ones I've chased. And Michael was the only one that has legitimately given me a PTSD type flashback. You know, so it was a different breed. It was a different breed, and people ask me, "Oh, you went through Michael, so that must have been bad. Are you still going to chase them?" Absolutely. I'm going to chase hurricanes until the day I'm not able to.
Back to before the storm hit. So like 9, 10 o'clock. You're at your house. You're in your safe place. What were you and your mother thinking? Thinking before a Category 5 hurricane was going to hit your area.
My mother was more excited than I was.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so she had a big hand, and also in my influence of weather, because she liked it. She always loved going through thunderstorms and stuff like that. But she was always like, "Let's go outside. Let's take a look. Let's open the door. Let's see what's going on." And so, about 9 or 10 o'clock, we're finally starting to get into the main rain shield. We're starting to get into the thicker stuff. We're not quite in the core yet, but we're still, we're starting to see those winds pick up. And about every 5 minutes, she was opening up the door, going outside, taking a look. And then I think it was when the first pine tree fell down across the street from us that she realized, oh, this is real. But the whole time I knew, because this is what I do. And eventually I had to pull her in. I'm like, Mom, you need to get inside the house because it's about to get nasty. And about 10 minutes later, um, we had the extreme wind warning that was issued by the National Weather Service in Tallahassee. I think it was their first time ever issuing one. And then immediately after it was issued, the power went out and the internet went out. And we didn't get power back for 3 months, and we didn't get internet back. Sorry, we got power back in a month and internet in three. But that was the last time we had working internet at that place, for a long time. But everything went off, and then all of a sudden, the core was getting closer and closer, and that's when we knew. And that was about 10:30, 11 o'clock.
Tell me about the house you lived. Were there any shutters? I mean, like, how new the house was? Was it a concrete house or wood frame house?
Yeah, so it was masonry, brick, a brick house, um, built in the early '80s. My grandparents were the second owners on paper, but they were the first family that lived there, and they had lived there since '84. And so they moved into the house in 1984, and it was built, out of brick basically. Um, but the roof had never been replaced to that point. The roof was really old. A lot of things in that home were old. There was just no work that was done to it. But my grandfather, it was one of those people that, if there's nothing that needs to be done, I'm not going to do it. If unless water's pouring on my head from the ceiling, I'm not going to worry about it. So everything that went through Michael was original from '84.
Were there any? Did you guys have any shutters?
No, nothing, nothing. We were just wide open to the 160 mile an hour winds.
Was it away from the water? Was it like in an evacuation zone?
We lived on the precipice of the evacuation zone. So we were right there on the border, but we were out of it. But there's a little creek and a canal, that runs behind our house. But it's not like the canals down in Southwest Florida where they're, big and, you can swim across them. It's just a little drainage creek type of deal. But when it rains a lot and there's a lot of activity from water, it can flood. And then when it floods, it creeps up into our backyard. And my biggest fear was always if a category 5 hit at the right angle, it would push the water from the bay into Martin Lake. Then the water from Martin Lake would then be pushed upstream into the creek, and all of that water from the creek would then find its way into our yard and eventually our house. And so what was scary was we were away from the ocean, away from the Gulf, but we had that creek, and during the height of the storm, obviously I had no power, no internet, so I didn't have any radar. I couldn't see where the storm was and what angle it was coming in. But the winds outside, they're gusting to 160, 170, and trees are falling down left and right. You can't see. It's like a blizzard almost. And my thought the entire time was, oh my God, that creek is flooding and it's eventually going to get into the house. And I was worried because, well, if the water gets into the house, where are we going to go? We can't go anywhere. We can't go outside. Can't go up because we have the attic, but it's not that big. But yeah, so to answer your question directly, we were on water per se, but not like the Gulf or a bay. There was a little drainage ditch that fed into Martin Lake.
So it wasn't like what happened Lake Pontchartrain during Katrina when the flood, but it was water, but not Gulf water. It wasn't, bay water.
Right, right. Yeah, it was all freshwater flooding, and it flooded back there, but it didn't make it up to the house because the way that the house is built, it's built on an incline. So at the top of the incline here is the house, and then down at the bottom is the creek. So the creek rose up to about here, but it didn't quite make it to the house. So that was good.
But so now tell me when the eye wall came. One, what did it sound like? And two, what could you see, or maybe not want to see?
Yeah. So when the eye wall of Hurricane Michael came through, it was about noonish is when it happened. Um, we peeked out. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. In the eye wall, my mom and I, we put a mattress in the hallway, and then we basically laid on the floor like this with our heads together and our feet facing out like that. Yep, and we had the mattress down on top of us because we're surrounded by pine trees in that neighborhood. And so my thought was if a pine tree falls through this house, because we're not going to see it, but if a pine tree falls through the house, at least we're under a mattress and we have some sort of protection. We have some kind of chance. But the way that the wind whistled through a brick building is something that will always stick with me. And then about, I don't know, a couple minutes later, we heard a loud crash coming from the garage. And we went, and so the way that it worked, we had a door leading to the garage. And then obviously in the garage was the garage door that opened up to the outside. Well, we opened up the garage door from our house to the garage. And when I did, I almost got sucked out into the garage. I didn't know what had happened, but then I looked and our garage door had blew in. And so all of that wind, those 160-mile-an-hour wind gusts were being blown in and compressed through this little crack, or now really a hole at this point, from where the garage door was and the frame of the house. And so it was coming in like a wind tunnel, basically, and winds inside the garage. were almost as strong as outside because of the way the winds were being funneled in. And my mom had, and I'm a big guy, right? My mom had to pull me as I was pulling the garage door closed because that's how much resistance there was on it from the wind. And then that's when it really sank in for her that things were going south. And then as we got closer to the center and closer to the center, you could feel your ears pop as those wind gusts were coming through, and each strong wind gust brought in a new ear pop or a new sound or a new feeling. And yeah, that was something that if I'm going to go through a hurricane again, I want to be out. I want to be out in my car because I want to see what's going on, and I want to try to position myself. But I lived in that house my whole life. It was my childhood home, basically, and it was always a place of safe refuge. But to feel it shake in those 160, 170 mile an hour wind gusts is something I'll never forget.
Was there a feeling that you and your mom might not live through, Michael?
I probably had that feeling for about 5 minutes. It was probably right after the garage door blew in, and right before the eye wall, or right before the eye passed over. We were in the eye for about 10 minutes. We didn't get a direct center, but we got clipped by the northwest corner of the eye, so we had the clearing and all that for about 10 minutes. But during the time between the garage door blowing in and the eye passing, I thought to myself, okay, there's a legitimate chance that a pine tree could fall through this house and land on us and kill us. I wasn't worried about the roof blowing off. I wasn't worried about the walls collapsing. And really, by that point, I wasn't even really worried about the canal anymore and the water coming up. I was just worried about a big pine tree falling through the house. And thankfully, that never happened. But during that brief period, yeah, I absolutely thought that.
Did you even consider going outside doing the eye, or were you just basically in your spot the whole time?
During the eye, we took a moment to go. So we have a back porch, basically a sunroom, a Florida room. We went out onto the Florida room, and it's screened in, but we went out there. We were gonna go out back and take a look, but there was just trees that had fallen down on the deck and by the sunroom, and so the door was blocked, and so there was no way for us to open up the porch door to go outside. We tried, but we couldn't. Um, then we opened up the front door, and there were a bunch of wires hanging out in front of our front door. We didn't know if they were live or not, and so we were just like, yeah, let's just avoid that. And so we ended up staying inside, but we took that moment to kind of survey the damage to see where we were. All of the seals on the window had broken. Water was flooding into every room through the windows, from being blown in through those storm created openings, and there was a lot of flooding on the carpet. It wasn't deep, but it was definitely enough to cause damage and problems. Um, but yeah, we tried to go outside, couldn't, and then just took kind of that moment to take a breather. And of course, me knowing weather, I knew the back half was coming, and so I told my mom, I was like, "All right, let's take a break. The second that this wind kicks back up, let's go back to the hall for the backside." And thankfully, the backside was nowhere near as bad.
So, did you ever go back outside when the eye wall was done ravaging Panama City? When did you finally go outside, and what were the scenes like?
So we went outside right after everything had started to calm down. This was about 4 p.m. And the neighbor across the street, you can hear in her voice that she had been crying. I think they had just moved from like New York or some northern state, and they had never been through this before. And so you could hear in her voice she had been crying and terrified. And she yelled out from her front door, "Is it over?" And and I was like, yeah, I think so. Um, we went through the eye earlier, and things are calming down. I think we're good. And so she came out. All the neighbors, everybody started to come out of their homes, and the only way to describe it was like somebody dropped a nuke on the town, and then it didn't destroy the buildings in our area, but what was once a kind of a thick forest almost built on top of a swamp was just completely devoid of trees and foliage and things of that nature. It was just all gone. The houses were thankfully fine, but um, for the most part, one of my friends' neighbor on that street, a tree fell right through the center of their home, which they were okay, thankfully, physically. But that was what my concern was for our home. But tree fell through their house, but they were okay. They'd actually left to go somewhere else. Um, and then after that, we just started talking to neighbors. We walked around the street for a little bit to look at everything. Um, by that point, the sun was starting to go down a little bit, and so we went back to the house and locked the door and settled in for the first night. But it looked like during the daylight, like I said, like a bomb had been dropped.
So, other than in the garage, the structure of the house was intact.
Structure of the house was intact. We had a lot of roof damage. The roof needed to be replaced. Those windows needed to be replaced because of the seals that were damaged. But the walls themselves, the framing, all that stuff was fine.
Wait, do you mean the roof itself was damaged, or just the shingle part of the roof?
The shingle part of the roof was damaged. I don't think there was any damage to the sheathing underneath the shingles. I don't think there was any damage, but I know that a bunch of shingles were blown off and ripped off.
But for being in an eye wall of 160-mile-an-hour hurricane, and I mean, with the damage I'm sure you saw,
Yeah,
I'm guessing you and your mom will consider yourselves lucky.
yeah, we were lucky for sure. And a lot of the houses in our neighborhood kind of had the same fate, where it was ton of shingle damage, ton of damage to like the exterior facades, but there was no structural damage for the most part because a lot of the homes in that neighborhood were made of brick. And so because of the way it was constructed with brick, they held up fine, and even in the strongest of wind gusts. Um, which in the eye wall, we had those mesovortices where, in some instances, wind instantaneous wind gusts were over 200 mile an hour in certain parts of the eye wall, and we it survived and it did okay, outside of course, the shingle damage and things like that. But then as you branched out and got further out, and started getting a better view of more buildings in town, you started to see that a lot of people weren't as lucky as really our neighborhood.
Yeah, particularly around the Air Force Base and Mexico Beach. I mean, Mexico Beach, I remember seeing videos of whole structures being swept into the Gulf. I mean, remind me of Michael seeing a whole structure being swept into the Gulf.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I haven't read the report in a while, but I think the maximum storm surge recorded was 14 foot in Mexico Beach. It could be 18, but I think it was 14. But that for the type of construction that was there at the time, you
Yeah.
know, it was not surviving that, and so a lot of stuff got wiped out.
I'm sure you saw the one building that was built for the big one, or heard about the one building that was built for the big one.
You're talking about the El Governor, the motel?
No, the house on Mexico Beach that was built for the big one.
Oh yeah, the circle one, right? Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I'm
I can't remember how that one did. I think it did okay. all
No,
things considered.
I think there was like a concrete with like 40-foot house with 40-foot pilings that withstood the winds, but
Yeah.
I don't think it fared quite as well as the apartment did. What was the apartment like?
Oh, the apartment was totaled. The apartment was absolutely destroyed. And so we were living with my mom-in-law at the time. It was me, my wife, and my mom-in-law, her mom. And we were getting ready to move out of the apartment anyway. We were actually scheduled to move into the new home the day Hurricane Michael hit. Um, and the house that we moved into was actually closer to the center of the storm, but it did a lot better because it was an old school brick house. They had actually just replaced the roof, and a lot of the construction components were new because they did a lot of renovations to it, and it held up just fine. But the apartment, um, we were on the first floor, the ceilings were caving in, everything was soaked, a lot of our stuff was damaged. Um,
I'm guessing the windows were not built for 160-mile-per-hour winds.
No, no, they were not. So, there was just a ton of water damage that came in and a lot of things that were, that were damaged there. And um, the apartment didn't do too well. It's better now. Obviously, it's been 7 years, so they came back and bounced back. But at the time, you know, it had only, it had been about 2 days had passed from the time the hurricane hit to the time I went back to the apartment. And just in 2 days alone, you could already start to smell the mildew, and you can already start to smell the scent of growing mold, just in the 2 days that had passed.
Yeah, that would have been a fun.